May 2025. In the woods of Nova Scotia. Two young children vanished from their home, no noise, no trace. Lily was 6. Jack was only 4. No shoes, no backpack, no cameras. No one saw them leave. No one heard a thing. The sliding door was shut. The scent trail ended at the driveway. The parents seemed to be hiding the truth. Why would both disappear at the same time? Why did the mother leave right after? Why is the stepdad banned from seeing their baby sister? What really happened in that house on the morning of May 2nd? Where are the children? And more importantly, how do two parents lose both their kids without a sound? The disappearance. Lilly and Jack Sullivan lived in a remote part of Nova Scotia with their mother, Malehya Brooks-Murray, their baby sister Meadow, and their mother's partner, Daniel Robert Martell. Lilly, the older of the two siblings, was 6 years old. According to her mother, she was talkative, outgoing, and full of energy. She often wore pink and was known to be closely bonded with her younger brother, Jack. Jack, just 4 years old, was quieter but still active and playful. He was frequently seen playing in the kitchen during mornings and, like many kids his age, still wore diapers and small boots. The two children were inseparable and formed the emotional core of the household. Their mother, Malehya, was a member of the Sapekatik First Nation, a Mi'kmaq community in Nova Scotia. She had 3 children in total: Lily, Jack, and baby Meadow. Her true name was Malehya, but it often misspelled in media reports as Malehya, Malehya. At the time, Malehya was unemployed and had left her home community to live with Daniel in a rural, heavily wooded area near Gairloch Road. Daniel Robert Martell, 33, was not the biological father of Lily, Jack, or Meadow. He had been in a relationship with Malehya for about 3 years and lived with her and the children in a cluttered trailer home surrounded by forest. He worked only 1 day a week at a local sawmill, while spending most of his time at home. He shared the house with his own mother and several animals, including multiple cats and a dog. Importantly, Daniel had no legal custody or guardianship rights over any of the children. As for Meadow, the youngest child, she was around 1 year old at the time. It is still unclear whether Daniel was her biological father, although he referred to her as "my baby girl." No documentation has confirmed any paternity. The family home was located off Gairloch Road in Lansdowne Station, Nova Scotia, a sparsely populated area with no close neighbors, no security cameras, and only dirt roads cutting through dense forest. The house had no fencing, and the rear entrance was a sliding glass door. The overall living conditions were modest, described by many as poor, with limited resources and little to no safety infrastructure for small children. In the days leading up to May 1st, 2025, the Sullivan household appeared stable on the surface. On the afternoon of May 1st, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police confirmed that Lily and Jack were seen in public with family members. This is the last verified sighting of the children by anyone outside the household. The time was not specified, but officials referred to it simply as afternoon. From that moment on, no one, not neighbors, delivery drivers, or community members, saw or heard the children again. There were no surveillance cameras to confirm their presence, no health appointments, no digital or physical trail. There was also no indication from anyone outside the household that the children were still alive or inside the home on the night of May 1st or early morning of May 2nd. The only accounts of what happened the next morning come from the 2 adults in the home, Daniel and Malehya. According to Daniel, sometime after sunrise, Lily came into the bedroom wearing a pink shirt, and he could hear Jack playing in the kitchen. A few minutes later, the house fell silent. When he went to check, the sliding glass door at the back of the house was shut. The children were gone. Their boots were missing. Daniel said he got in his vehicle and drove around the property looking through back trails, ditches, and wooded areas. However, it remains unclear how much time passed between when he noticed the children were missing and when he informed Malehya. At 10:06 a.m. on May 2nd, a 911 call was placed by Malehya Brooks-Murray to report Lily and Jack missing. This 24-hour window between the final sighting on May 1st and the 9/11 call on May 2nd, represents the most critical and mysterious stretch in the case. It is also the moment investigators began to question whether this was simply a case of two children wandering off, or something far more deliberate and far more sinister. The search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan. The formal investigation began at exactly 10:06 a.m. on May 2, 2025, when Malehya Brooks-Murray called 911 to report her children missing. What immediately raised questions was the fact that Daniel Martell, the adult who first noticed the children were gone, was not the one to make the call. This left a troubling gap in the timeline. RCMP officers arrived at the scene later that day and launched an immediate emergency search operation. The effort included ground teams, thermal drones, search dogs, low-flying aircraft, and support from civil air search and rescue. Despite the massive scale, there were no signs of forced entry, no physical evidence of foul play, no signs of an accident. No one outside the household could verify that the children had been seen that morning. The entire narrative depended solely on the word of two people. On May 3rd, search efforts expanded further into the woods, trails, ditches, and creeks surrounding the remote home. Yet no physical trace was found, no shoes, clothing, toys, blood, hair, or DNA. That same day, the RCMP officially upgraded the case to a criminal investigation. The home was sealed as a potential crime scene. Forensic teams, homicide investigators, and digital analysts were brought in to review every inch of the property and the digital footprint of the adults involved. Between May 4th and 6th, specialized divers from the underwater recovery team searched nearby bodies of water, including ponds, streams, and drainage areas. Once again, they found nothing. Not even the items Daniel claimed had disappeared with the children. A small backpack and a pair of boots were recovered. This total lack of traceable evidence raised even more doubts. How could two children vanish so completely without leaving behind so much as a footprint? On May 7th, after 5 fruitless days, the RCMP reduced the scale of the ground search. They issued a public statement saying that if the children were still in the forest, their chances of survival were extremely slim. Investigators called on anyone who had dashboard camera footage from April 28th to May 2nd, especially from the area around Gairloch Road, to turn it in. But nothing surfaced that placed Lilly or Jack anywhere after May 1st. No trail, no witness, no camera caught them leaving or arriving. It was as if they vanished into thin air. Between May 8th and 11th, investigators interviewed 35 individuals, including neighbors, delivery drivers, and community members. They also processed more than 180 tips, which included home security footage and vehicle dash cams. Despite this, no one aside from Daniel and Malehya could confirm seeing the children after the afternoon of May 1st. And even more disturbingly, there was no digital trace of the children, no recent appointments, photos, or messages. From May 12th onward, the investigation became more opaque. RCMP continued to process tips and conduct interviews, but never named any suspects. They also refused to classify the case as a kidnapping, instead referring to it as suspicious missing persons case. This ambiguous language frustrated the public and fueled speculation about the nature of the investigation. Some began to question whether the hesitation to use the word abduction was a deliberate attempt to avoid drawing national attention. Adding to the mystery, RCMP partnered with satellite imaging companies like Maxar and Planet Labs to scan the area. Analysts discovered a rectangular patch of disturbed ground near the Sullivan home, roughly 2 meters long. The timing of its appearance and disappearance coincided with the children's vanishing. The data was never confirmed as part of the case, but it quietly shifted the focus of the investigation toward potential concealment of evidence or foul play. Still, no arrests were made. No warrants were issued publicly. Meanwhile, Daniel Martell allowed media crews to film inside the home, even though it had been officially sealed as a crime scene. He gave guided tours, showing the children's bedroom and the kitchen where he claimed Jack had last been heard playing. Viewers were shocked. In most criminal investigations involving children, Even grieving parents refrained from compromising a potential crime scene. Daniel's behavior stood out as unusually composed, calm, controlled, even performative. At no point did he publicly express raw emotion or mention either child by name more than once or twice. While Daniel stayed in the public eye, Malehya disappeared from it entirely. According to RCMP, she had been advised not to speak to the press. But her complete withdrawal, no vigil appearances, no interviews, no open letters, was seen by many as odd, even concerning. In previous high-profile child disappearances, parents often make pleas through the media, begging for their children's return. In this case, the silence was deafening. Equally puzzling was the absence of an AMBR alert, despite both children being under the age of 7. The RCMP later explained that the case did not meet the legal criteria, which require evidence of an abduction. Critics argued that waiting abduction confirmation defeats the urgency such alerts are meant to address. The lack of an alert likely delayed public awareness and reduced early leads. Perhaps most unusual of all was the lack of visible psychological support for Malehya. In similar cases, police departments often ensure that parents receive trauma counseling or mental health check-ins. There was no mention of such efforts here. Was it withheld? Declined? Never offered? No one knows. And while trauma affects people in different ways, the lack of any observable reaction raised further questions. All of these elements, mixed messaging, a missing digital trail, inconsistent behavior, and unexplained silence, combined to create a haunting sense that this was not simply a case of children wandering off. As days became weeks, and leads turned cold, one thing became increasingly clear. Whatever happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan, it didn't happen by chance. It happened by design. Untrustworthy statements and moves. From the beginning of the investigation, it became increasingly clear this was no ordinary missing child case. The patterns didn't match. Too many things that should have been there were simply absent. No one outside the home saw or heard anything. No dogs barking. No cries for help. Not even a dropped boot. And that silence, it wasn't just around the woods. It was inside the house too. The behavior of those closest to the children only deepened the unease. There were no public pleas, no emotional breakdowns, no urgency, just scripted words and strange calm. At times, it felt like they were hiding something, or worse, protecting someone, as if they knew the truth. But for whatever reason, they couldn't, or wouldn't, say it aloud. From the moment Daniel Martell began speaking about the disappearance of Lilly and Jack, something felt off. He was calm, too calm. He told investigators that Lilly had walked into the bedroom wearing a pink shirt, while Jack was making noise in the kitchen. A few minutes later, silence. When he got up to check, they were gone. Just like that. No sound, no struggle, no explanation. He claims he immediately began driving around the property, looking through ditches and forest trails. But what no one could ever figure out was how much time actually passed between the moment he says he noticed the children were gone and the time 911 was called. Because that call? It wasn't made by him. It was made by Malehya at exactly 10:06 a.m. That gap in time is one of the most alarming holes in this entire timeline. What was Daniel doing during that period? Why didn't he, the adult present, call for help himself? The silence is not just literal, it's behavioral. There were no signs of panic, no desperation in his voice, no urgency in his words. In every interview since, Daniel has repeated the same phrases. One, in particular, stands out. They were just gone. I looked out the window, and I thought they might have wandered into the woods. It's a strange way to phrase the disappearance of two small children. There's no emotion in that sentence, just passive observation, like he was talking about a missing shoe, not two living, breathing kids. Even more unsettling is his refusal to use their names. In interviews, he almost never refers to Lilly or Jack directly. He says, they, the kids, those two. It's a subtle linguistic detachment, but it matters. It's as if he's speaking about strangers, not two children he helped raise for over 3 years. In one video, Daniel refers to Jack as Jackie. That's not how anyone else has ever referred to the boy. It caught viewers off guard, not just because it was unfamiliar, but because it felt oddly impersonal. Using an unexpected nickname in such a serious context gave the impression that Daniel was disconnected from the children, emotionally and even psychologically. Then came a statement that hit harder than any other. "I'm not their father. I had no rights over them." That one sentence speaks volumes. It's a rejection, not just of legal responsibility, but of emotional connection. It's also, perhaps, his attempt to explain why he didn't call 911. But more than anything, it highlights a deep lack of ownership in a moment when most parental figures would be breaking down, begging for help, doing anything to find the children. Stranger still, Daniel repeatedly brings up his own trauma in interviews. He says he was a victim of domestic abuse. He hints that Malehya, the children's mother, was violent. He talks about being misunderstood, being pushed away, being abandoned. All of this might be relevant in another story, but not here. Not now. Because what's missing in all of his media appearances is a single, desperate plea for Lilly and Jack. There's no, "Please, help me find them." No, "I miss them every second." Instead, his focus always circles back to himself. His pain, his side of the story. This behavior isn't just odd, it's strategic. Experts in behavioral analysis call it redirecting narrative. The more he talks about himself, the less he has to talk about the kids. And the more he emphasizes his own victimhood, the more sympathy he quietly tries to gain, even as two children remain missing. The emotional void in Daniel's interviews is impossible to ignore. There's no tremble in his voice, no breakdown, no visible struggle to hold it together. Everything he says sounds rehearsed, calculated, even distant. And when you compare his tone to other parents in similar tragedies, the contrast is stark. Most parents can't even get through a sentence without crying. Daniel, he barely flinches. When a person loses children under suspicious circumstances, their language says more than any police report ever could. In Daniel Martell's case, it wasn't what he said, it was how he said it, and what he chose not to say at all. On the other side, one of the most haunting elements was the near, complete absence of the children's mother, Malehya Brooks-Murray. In most missing child cases, the mother is often the emotional center, pleading for help, breaking down in front of cameras, doing anything to bring her children home. But here, there was none of that. No interviews. No statements. No public presence at all. To this day, Malehya has never appeared publicly to speak about the disappearance of Lilly and Jack. The RCMP later stated that she was advised not to speak to the media. While some accepted this as standard police protocol during an active investigation, many others found it disturbing, even unnatural. Her voice, her perspective, has been completely missing from the narrative. And in that silence, suspicion grew. On May 2, 2025, it was Malehya, not Daniel, who called 911 at 10:06 a.m. to report the children missing. While the full transcript of that call was never released, sources close to the case described her tone as calm, cold, and not panicked, a description that only added to the unease. For a mother who had just been told her two young children had vanished without a trace, many expected distress, hysteria, or urgency. Instead, they got calm detachment. And then came her next move, one that would define much of the public's perception of her. Within hours of the incident, Malehya left the home she shared with Daniel Martell, taking her youngest child, Meadow, with her. She moved in with relatives and cut off all communication with Daniel. She didn't return to the scene. She didn't help with searches. She didn't appear at any community vigils or events. Most chilling of all, she never shared a photo, a plea, or even a post asking for help finding her children. This behavior sparked division and debate across the community. Some said she was simply doing what the police told her to do, that staying silent and out of the spotlight was a way to protect herself and her surviving child. But others couldn't accept that explanation. What kind of mother doesn't speak their children's names? If your kids are missing, how do you stay quiet? These were the questions that began circulating on social media, on the internet, and around the dinner tables of Nova Scotia. Her silence became a void, one that was filled with rumors, theories, and suspicion. Some believed she knew something, but was afraid to say it. Others believed she was being shielded. And then there were those who wondered if her silence wasn't about fear, but about guilt. Absence is never neutral. When someone who should be screaming for help chooses instead to disappear into silence, that silence becomes a statement of its own. And for many watching this case unfold, Malehya's absence felt louder than any words she could have said. So, who are wearing, or even hiding the truth? Neither Daniel nor Malehya ever expressed the kind of raw, aching heartbreak you would expect from parents whose children had vanished without a trace. From what we saw, the division of roles between Daniel and Malehya was stark and deeply bizarre. Daniel, on one hand, leaned into the media. He welcomed film crews into the house, gave interviews, and offered carefully worded statements to news outlets. It was as if he had decided to control the narrative from the inside. Meanwhile, Malehya disappeared completely, refusing to speak, even when the community gathered for vigils and prayers. This strange dynamic, one too visible, the other completely invisible, only fueled public suspicion. And it got worse. Neither Daniel nor Malehya ever acknowledged personal responsibility. In every clip, in every quote, they presented themselves as bystanders, observers, as if this tragedy had happened around them, not through them. They didn't say, "I should have been more watchful." They didn't say, "I blame myself." They didn't even say, "I wish I'd done something differently." Not once. That kind of absence of guilt, of regret, of ownership is hard to overlook. In fact, it may be one of the most chilling aspects of this case. Because when two young children vanish into thin air, the silence of their guardians doesn't just speak, it screams. The missing links. As mentioned, from the earliest stages of the investigation, one unsettling truth kept surfacing: there was no trace of Lilly or Jack Sullivan. Not a footprint. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a broken branch, or even the impression of movement through the muddy ground. Despite the deployment of search dogs, drones, underwater teams, and heat-sensing technology, authorities found nothing. In nearly every other missing child case, there's something left behind: a shoe, a toy, a trail. But here, the forest remained silent, undisturbed, as if the children had never existed. There were no signs of forced entry at the home. The sliding glass door that Daniel claimed the children might have exited through was not ajar, not damaged, and with no visible tampering. No pry marks. No broken locks. Even more troubling, no one nearby, no neighbors, no passersby, no utility workers reported seeing anyone unfamiliar near the property. Dashcam footage collected from nearby roads showed nothing. No headlights. No strange vehicles. No activity. The house sits deep in a wooded area with only a single dirt road in and out, and yet no evidence of an intruder or an escape. Daniel also described what the children were wearing. Lilly in a pink shirt, Jack in pajamas, with boots and a backpack. But not a single person could confirm the children wore those clothes. Without visual confirmation, law enforcement had no accurate physical descriptions to use during search efforts. And that kind of uncertainty can cost lives. Digital forensics yielded the same frustrating emptiness. There were no outgoing signals from any devices linked to the children, no activity on tablets, phones, or security systems. No GPS pings, no outgoing calls, no signs of digital movement from the house. Even though RCMP requested dashcam footage from vehicles traveling near Gairloch Road between April 28 and May 2, they received zero useful leads. Not a single image of the children. Not one recording of any suspicious motion near the house. The last verified sighting of Lilly and Jack was on the afternoon of May 1st. After that, the trail ends. No one, not neighbors, not delivery drivers, not anyone in the community, heard anything. No sounds of struggle, no cries for help, no barking dogs. Even inside the house, there was no sign of chaos or panic, just silence. The moment investigators began piecing together the timeline, they were confronted with one troubling pattern. Nearly every critical detail came from a single person, Daniel Martell. Malehya, their mother, never confirmed that she saw or heard her children that morning. That means everything we think we know about the final hours of the children's lives rests entirely on Daniel's account. Unverified, unsupported, and uncorroborated. One of the most disturbing details involves the children's boots and backpack. Daniel stated that both children were wearing boots, and that Lilly had a small backpack when they vanished. Yet those items were never recovered. The terrain was soft and muddy in places, ideal for tracking footprints or dropped objects, and still, nothing was found. No clothing, no scattered contents, no tracks. Investigators noted that it was highly suspicious for such items to simply disappear without a trace. Then came an unexpected lead, not from ground searches, but from space. Using satellite imagery from Maxar and Planet Labs, AI analysis detected a strange rectangular patch of disturbed Earth roughly 2 meters wide. The anomaly appeared in an area not frequented by the family, and then disappeared shortly after the children went missing. While RCMP have not confirmed this location as a crime scene, the discovery shifted the focus of the investigation, suggesting the possibility of an intentional burial or concealed evidence. Yet the greatest mystery might not be outside in the woods, but inside the home itself. To this day, no third party has confirmed seeing Lilly or Jack inside the house on the morning of May 2. Daniel allowed a video crew to film parts of the home after the incident, even as RCMP considered it a sealed crime scene. And what was captured on camera raised even more questions. The house appeared oddly clean. No cereal bowls. No clutter. Then there was the question of their beds. In forensic investigations, signs of whether a bed has been slept in, flattened pillows, creased blankets, indentation in the mattress, can be crucial. But in this case, there was no mention of such details. It was never confirmed that the children had even woken up that morning. That absence left investigators wondering whether the story being told was a complete fabrication. The kitchen told a similar story. Daniel said Jack had been playing in the kitchen. But officers noted there were no dishes, no spilled milk, no open cereal boxes, nothing that would suggest a typical morning routine in a home with 2 toddlers. No breakfast, no signs of activity, no mess. And in a household with multiple animals, there was also no noticeable odor, no visible fur, and no fresh disarray. It was all too clean, too quiet. Perhaps most damning of all was the timing of the 911 call. It wasn't made until 10:06 a.m. Daniel claims he realized the children were missing shortly after sunrise, possibly as early as 600 or 700 a.m. That means there was a 3 to 4 hour delay before calling for help. In missing child cases, the first hour, known as the golden hour, is critical. Every minute matters. But here, the response was curiously slow, suggesting that those in the house may not have been panicked at all. The behavior of Malehya also raised questions. What time did she wake up? Did she check on her children? Did she speak to them? No one knows. Her silence on these basic matters, as well as the absence of any digital communication between her and Daniel that morning, made analysts suspicious. There was no record of Daniel texting or calling her before she made the 911 call. And if he truly believed the children were gone, contacting their mother, who was in the same home, should have been his first move. All of this adds up to a chilling reality. This might not be a spontaneous disappearance. This was a controlled environment, one where evidence was either never left or meticulously removed. The house was too clean, the timelines too loose, the behavior too calm. The clues, or lack thereof, suggest preparation. In real missing child cases, there's chaos, emotion, desperation. Parents call for help immediately. They tear through the woods. They scream. They cry. But in this case, none of that happened. Instead, there was silence, control, and an eerie sense that someone inside that house already knew the children were never coming back. From the moment Lilly and Jack Sullivan were reported missing on May 2, 2025, it became clear that their family unit had already collapsed. Immediately after the children vanished, Malehya Murray left the home on Gairloch Road, taking her youngest daughter, Meadow, with her. She never returned, never contacted Daniel Martell again, the man she had lived with for over 3 years. Her own family took her in, and since that day, Malehya disappeared from the public eye. RCMP stated that Malehya was advised not to speak publicly due to the ongoing investigation. But silence, in situations involving missing children, is rarely neutral. It quickly divided the public. Some sympathized, believing she was following legal counsel and protecting her remaining child. Others were skeptical. What kind of mother doesn't fight publicly for her missing kids? The lack of emotion, the absence of pleas or interviews, raised serious doubts. She wasn't seen at memorials. She didn't post online. She didn't join any searches. Meanwhile, Daniel Martell remained at the house. But more troubling was his isolation. Malehya's family cut ties with him completely. No one from her side reached out or stood by him. In an interview, Daniel admitted, "Her family, they believe I did something. I never saw them again after that." Daniel had no legal rights over Lilly, Jack, or even Meadow. Though he had lived with all 3 children for years, he wasn't their father by law or biology. After the disappearance, Child Protective Services intervened and barred him from contacting Meadow. That action speaks volumes. Even without public accusations, authorities saw enough reason to prevent him from being near a toddler. Daniel, in response, told reporters, "I'm not their father, so I don't have any rights." A sentence like that cuts deep. It's not just factual, it's distancing, it's cold, and it made many wonder how invested he truly was in the children's lives. Even Meadow's status remains unclear. Daniel often referred to her as "my baby girl," but there is no legal record confirming he is her father. If he wasn't, why did he speak as if he were? And if he was, why was he barred from seeing her? This ambiguity adds another layer of confusion to a case already clouded by uncertainty. Perhaps the most haunting detail is this: Daniel appears utterly alone. In every clip, every interview, he stands by himself. No one sits beside him. No one advocates for him. No neighbor. No friend. No relative. It's hard not to wonder, was this how others saw him even before Lilly and Jack disappeared? Was he always isolated? Or did people choose to distance themselves after something they knew or suspected? Notably, the biological father of Lilly and Jack has never been mentioned by anyone. No name, no involvement, no public plea, no presence at vigils. This absence raises uncomfortable possibilities. Was he barred from contact? Was he deceased? Or was he simply never involved? Whatever the reason, it left Lilly and Jack even more vulnerable, with no paternal figure fighting for them in the wake of their disappearance. Even before May 2nd, this wasn't a stable home. Malehya had distanced herself from her indigenous community when she moved in with Daniel, a white man living off-grid. Tensions likely existed long before the tragedy. Meanwhile, the household was reportedly cluttered, full of animals, and disconnected from normal social systems. There were no confirmed school records, no medical histories available, no proof of government support. In many ways, the children seemed to exist off the grid, unprotected and undocumented. Neither Daniel nor Malehya retained public legal counsel. In cases like this, it's standard to see parents protected by lawyers, issuing statements, clarifying timelines, or managing media. The lack of legal representation is troubling. It could suggest they had no resources, or it could imply they were both trying to lay low. The separation of the family. From the very start, the Sullivan case wasn't just about 2 missing children. It was about a broken family and a silence that felt too coordinated to ignore. After Lilly and Jack vanished, their mother, Malehya Brooks-Murray, immediately left the home with her infant daughter, Meadow. She never returned. She cut off all contact with her partner of 3 years, Daniel Martell, and went back to live with her own family. Since then, she has disappeared from the public eye entirely. This sudden split exposed the deep fractures that had likely existed long before May 2nd. The RCMP claimed she was advised not to speak publicly due to the ongoing investigation. Still, many questioned her complete withdrawal. Others defended her, suggesting trauma, fear, or pressure from authorities might explain her silence. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed behind. He told his side of the story repeatedly, but failed to offer any new evidence. Perhaps more telling was his complete isolation. No one from Malehya's side supported him. In fact, Daniel himself said, "Her family, they believe I did something. I never saw them again after that." Soon after the disappearance, Child Protective Services stepped in. Since Daniel had no legal custody rights to Meadow, CPS barred him from contacting her. This wasn't just a procedural move. It was a precaution. Without stating it outright, the system was signaling that Daniel could be a risk. Not charged, not convicted, but flagged. There were other troubling signs. No one could confirm that Daniel was Meadow's biological father, even though he referred to her as "my baby girl." No legal documents were provided. If he was her father, why was CPS able to bar him so easily? And if he wasn't, why claim her so personally? The ambiguity added another layer of suspicion. The distrust went both ways. Malehya's family had long disapproved of her relationship with Daniel. She was Mi'kmaq, from the Sapek'n-Katik First Nation. He was a white man living in isolation, far from her roots. Her decision to leave her community for a life in the woods may have strained her family ties. But after the disappearance, there was no question where their loyalty stood. They welcomed her and Meadow back, and never spoke Daniel's name again. Strangely, throughout all the reports, there was never a mention of Lilly and Jack's biological father. Not his name, not his presence, not even a comment. His total absence created a dangerous legal vacuum. Without a legal parent or guardian demanding answers, the case risked fading from public pressure. These children had no one with legal standing to fight for them. Perhaps the most chilling part: there was never a united front. Not once did Daniel and Malehya appear together, speak together, or issue a joint plea. In most cases involving missing children, parents, no matter how strained, put aside their differences for their kids. Not here. They stayed apart, said nothing about each other, acted like two people who knew it was safer not to talk. And if that wasn't enough, neither party ever retained a legal spokesperson. No lawyers. No public statements crafted by professionals. For two adults potentially under investigation, this was unusual. Most people in such cases hire counsel to protect themselves or prepare for what's to come. But Daniel and Malehya. Silence. Either they didn't have the means, or they didn't want the attention. Or perhaps they were waiting to see who would break first. Even beyond the home, silence echoed. There were no records of Lilly or Jack attending press school, or receiving regular medical care. No school photos. No pediatric visits. No digital trail. It was as if they had been hidden from the system long before they vanished. And hiding children, intentionally or not, always raises red flags. Technology and breakthrough. After the initial 5 days of intense physical searches yielded no results, no footprints, no fabric, no backpacks, not even strands of hair, RCMP shifted their focus from boots on the ground tactics to a digital and aerial strategy. The move signaled a turning point in the case. If no trace could be found on land, perhaps the answers lay in the sky or in unseen data. In collaboration with commercial satellite providers Maxar Technologies and Planet Labs, RCMP secured access to high-resolution satellite imagery spanning before, during, and after May 1st and SIND, 2025. Analysts and AI systems began scanning for minute changes in terrain, unusual object movement, or disruptions that could suggest human activity. What they found sparked even more questions than answers. As mentioned, the most haunting discovery was a rectangular patch of disturbed earth, approximately 2 meters long, detected in a forested area, not far from a Sullivan property. The spot wasn't near any trails or construction sites. It appeared suddenly and was gone within days. The AI system flagged it as anomalous due to its shape, timing, and location. While RCMP never officially confirmed whether the patch was excavated or examined, the find marked the case's transition into a potential criminal investigation. AI also flagged a gray SUV that drove past the Sullivan home 4 times over a 2-week span. It always passed by around 7 a.m. and paused briefly at the same intersection before disappearing. The pattern was not only unusual, it was also undocumented by anyone involved in the case. No resident, no family member, no visitor had ever admitted to owning such a vehicle. Even more unsettling was the AI's recognition of a woman in a wide-brimmed hat who appeared on 2 separate community cameras over 5 days. Each time, she was seen in distant, unrelated neighborhoods, once 1.2 kilometers from the home, another in a commercial area near a now abandoned shopping complex. Her identity remains unknown and her presence unexplained. AI analysis didn't stop there. By feeding satellite data into specialized algorithms, the system detected subtle variations that would be invisible to the human eye. Soil displacement, vehicle path deviations, shifting shadows that suggested recent digging or concealed objects. While these details weren't conclusive on their own, they painted a picture that contradicted Daniel Martell's calm narrative of 2 children simply walking off. Simultaneously, RCM collected more than 180 digital submissions from community members, dashcam footage, drone visuals, and CCTV from homes and businesses along Gairloch Road and the surrounding area. While most yielded nothing of note, a few sparked deeper interest. For example, one neighbor's camera captured a faint pink blanket and a shadowy figure at a time inconsistent with Daniel's reported timeline. RCMP did not confirm whether the blanket was linked to Lilly, but its appearance raised concerns. There was also a troubling void in technical corroboration. Daniel said he drove around looking for the kids after realizing they were missing. But no GPS data, vehicle tracking logs, or dashcam footage could support this claim. Likewise, no one could confirm what time Malehya Brooks-Murray woke up, or if she had interacted with the children that morning. No messages or calls were exchanged between the 2 adults from sunrise until the 911 call at 10:06 a.m., a delay that remains both baffling and suspicious. Efforts to scan the forest using thermal drones between May 2nd and May 6th came up empty. Not a single heat signature suggested the presence of small children or recently displaced objects. Investigators expected to, at least, rule out accidental hiding or wandering, but the data gave them nothing. Even the weather and environmental factors, typically checked in rural disappearances, were never publicly disclosed. No records of ambient sound levels. No confirmation of wind, fog, or moonlight. In remote investigations, these cues can determine whether cries for help might have been heard, or if an intruder could have approached undetected. Finally, despite receiving extensive footage from camera submissions, RCMP never revealed which clips, if any, were relevant. They never identified the car near the abandoned strip mall 800 meters away. They never clarified if the rectangular soil patch was disturbed ground or a red herring. They said nothing about the possibility of a link between the woman in the hat and the SUV. In cases like this, where silence dominates the physical and digital landscape, sometimes what isn't found is more telling than what is. The data trail, or lack thereof, painted a chilling possibility. Whatever happened to Lilly and Jack, it didn't happen outside. It happened inside. And someone worked hard to erase every trace. Community drives their way. The Sullivan case obviously was beyond a normal chill-from disappearance. Community response quickly evolved beyond sorrow. What emerged was a storm of suspicion, outrage, and desperate inquiry. Not only directed at the family, but at law enforcement, the justice system, and the growing sense that something critical was being kept in the dark. The silence from the Sapaicatic First Nation was one of the first red flags. Lilly and Jack were of Mi'kmaq descent, and yet, no official representative from their indigenous community ever spoke publicly. For some, the explanation was cultural or procedural. But for others, the silence pointed to something deeper. It was suggested that Malehya had distanced herself long ago by leaving her community to live with Daniel Martell, a white man in rural isolation. Perhaps she was no longer seen as part of the community. Or perhaps the case had become too sensitive internally, and silence was chosen as a shield. As the family withdrew, the public stepped forward. Volunteers from Gairloch and surrounding areas organized their own searches through forests, fields, and abandoned structures. They held candlelight vigils, distributed flyers, and gathered to remember two children who, even in their disappearance, seemed forgotten by the very people who should have fought for them. Notably, Daniel and Malehya never appeared any of these events. The absence of the parents at community-led efforts caused anger to fester. "If they won't show up, do they even want the kids found?" became a common refrain. Online, the case exploded. On the internet and various crime forums, internet sleuths launched deep dives into every available detail. Timelines were scrutinized. Transcripts were dissected. Screenshots of Daniel's interviews were analyzed frame by frame. But the real fury was aimed at the RCMP. As the days dragged on with little public update, trust in law enforcement began to erode. Why hadn't they released the coordinates of the rectangular soil disturbance found via satellite? Had they excavated it or not? Why wasn't the gray SUV seen circling the area publicly addressed? What about the woman in the wide-brimmed hat seen twice within a 1.2 km radius? The refusal to disclose even basic information led many to believe that the RCMP either didn't have control of the case or were intentionally withholding something. Social media debates grew toxic. One camp accused the police of incompetence or cover-up, citing a long history of mishandled cases involving Indigenous children. Another group warned against making assumptions without legal evidence. The tension escalated as conspiracy theories took root, fueled by the total lack of clear answers. The absence of a unified family presence made it worse. In most missing child cases, even estranged parents come together to issue joint pleas. But not here. Daniel and Malehya remained completely separate, no shared statements, no public support for each other. Their mutual silence was interpreted by many as coordination, not grief. People began asking, what are they protecting? And why aren't they protecting the children instead? As the investigation dragged on, public efforts didn't slow down, but faith in the system did. Law enforcement was no longer seen as the sole seeker of truth. Now that role had shifted to the community itself. The same people once offering prayers and candles were now posting satellite images and dissecting interview pauses. The tragedy of Lilly and Jack was no longer just a disappearance. It became a symbol of silence, disconnection, and a system that many believed had failed. And still, the question echoes across every thread, every vigil, every forum. If they won't tell us what happened, who will? What really happened? In the absence of solid evidence or public clarity, the case has opened the floodgates to a range of troubling theories. These aren't just wild speculations, they are grounded in the eerie behavior of the adults involved. The missing digital and physical traces, and the unsettling silence from every angle of this story. One of the most widely discussed theories revolves around coercive control. Many believe that Malehya Brooks-Murray, the children's mother, was not merely in a quiet relationship with Daniel Martell, she was trapped. This idea aligns with patterns seen in emotionally abusive relationships, where one partner systematically isolates the other from friends, family, and community. Malehya, after all, left her Indigenous community to live in a remote, wooded area with no support network. She had no public voice, no visible allies. Since the children disappeared, she has remained completely silent. Some suggest this is not complicity, it's fear. Fear of losing her surviving child. Fear of retaliation. Or fear rooted in years of subtle, persistent control. Another unsettling theory is that the children were systematically removed from public systems long before they vanished. There are no known school records, no confirmed medical files, no vaccinations, no photos, no daycare logs. It's as if Lilly and Jack were ghosts to the state. That lack of documentation has led many to believe the children were intentionally hidden from any institutions that could have flagged signs of abuse or neglect. If someone wanted to make children disappear without triggering alarms, this kind of isolation would be a horrifyingly effective first step. There's also growing suspicion that authorities may be withholding crucial information. Many community members and online investigators have questioned the RRCMP for their lack of transparency. The public still doesn't know if the rectangular ground anomaly found via satellite AI was ever excavated. There's no explanation about footage from dashcams or neighborhood cameras. No updates on physical evidence found in the woods. People are asking, why so much silence? Is this standard investigative caution? Or is there something the authorities don't want to reveal? Then comes the theory that hits hardest, the possibility that one or both of the adults know what happened and are staying quiet. The idea of a mutual silence pact has been discussed across social media, Reddit threads, and true crime forums. Supporters of this theory believe that either Daniel or Malehya witnessed or caused something they can't take back. Legal advice, fear of arrest, or guilt may be keeping them quiet. And the fact that the two never appeared together after the disappearance, never issued a joint statement, never looked for the children as a team, makes this theory feel plausible. It's not a broken family reacting in shock. It's two people pulling apart like they've rehearsed it. For the theory explaining for the disappearance, the most positive theory was the children wandered off and got lost. It was offered by Daniel Martell, and initially, the RCMP investigated along this line. The idea was that Lilly and Jack had woken up early, quietly left through the sliding back door, and wandered into the surrounding woods, eventually getting lost. But this theory quickly began to unravel. There were no physical traces, no footprints, no drag marks, no discarded shoes or backpacks, no broken branches, nothing. What raised even more suspicion was that the sliding glass door was reportedly found closed. Something unlikely if two small children had slipped out alone. The lack of any sound or disturbance, especially with animals in the home, made this scenario less and less plausible. Another theory, supported by behavioral analysts and public discussion, suggests that Lilly and Jack may have already been dead before the morning of May 2nd. No one outside of Daniel ever confirmed seeing or hearing the children after the afternoon of May 1st. There were no signs of a normal morning routine, no breakfast dishes, no messy beds, no toys scattered, no noise. Everything we know about the morning of the disappearance comes from Daniel's account alone. If he was lying, then the entire timeline could have been fabricated to cover something that happened earlier. Beside that, many people wonder that was an accidental death covered up. This theory posits that one or both children may have died due to an accident inside the home, falling, choking, suffocating, and the adults panicked. Out of fear of legal consequences or losing custody of their surviving child, Meadow, they may have chosen to hide the truth and dispose of the bodies. Several facts support this idea. The house was unusually clean for a family with 3 young children and pets. The 911 call wasn't placed until hours after the children supposedly went missing, and investigators eventually shifted their focus from a missing persons case to a potential crime scene. The theory points to fear, not malice, as the motive behind the cover-up. A darker variation suggests that either Daniel or Malehya, or both, may have intentionally harmed the children in a moment of rage or breakdown. Stress from poverty, mental health issues, or strained family dynamics could have escalated to violence. In this version, one parent may have committed the act while the other helped cover it up, either out of loyalty, fear, or guilt. People who support this theory point to the complete absence of emotional expressions from both adults. No tears, no public pleas, no visible grief. Their lack of urgency and distancing language. Like Daniel saying, "I'm not their father," feels disturbingly disconnected. Lastly, this is perhaps the most chilling hypothesis, that the disappearance was not spontaneous, but premeditated. The absence of any digital, physical, or environmental traces is almost too perfect. There were no alerts from smart devices, no camera footage, no sound, no mess, nothing. AI satellite scans even detected a freshly disturbed 2-meter rectangular patch of ground that vanished shortly afterward, potentially a burial site. These signs hint at careful planning, concealment, and erasure. Some believe this might even point to a more sinister possibility: the children were sold. While speculative, the theory has gained traction because of how unnaturally clean this disappearance has been. Each of these theories reflects different angles of a mystery that continues to baffle the public. Whether this was a tragic accident, a case of negligence, or something more sinister, the truth remains hidden beneath a wall of silence, and the longer that silence continues, the louder these theories become. Justified reason. When children vanish without a trace, the first instinct of investigators, and often the public, is to look inward. If there's no broken lock, no credible eyewitness, no struggle, then the only people left in the picture are the ones closest to the child, the parents. In the case of John Ben Ramsey, suspicion quickly turned toward her parents, John and Patsy. Why? The ransom note was found inside the house, written with a pen and paper from their own kitchen. The tone of the note was strange, theatrical. And then there was Patsy's 911 call. Critics said it sounded staged, too composed. Yet after decades of investigation, no physical evidence has ever tied either parent to John Bain's death. In Madeleine McCann's disappearance, her parents, Kate and Jerry, left her asleep in a vacation apartment while they dined nearby. When she went missing, the Portuguese initially suspected them of covering up an accident, citing cadaver dog alerts and a lack of forced entry. But there was no concrete forensic proof. Years later, suspicion shifted to a German sex offender already in custody. Casey Anthony, mother of Kaylee Anthony, was actually tried for murder. Prosecutors accused her of killing her daughter and lying about it for weeks. The case was explosive. Her behavior, partying while Kaylee was missing, lying to police, and showing little outward emotion, was central to the prosecution's theory. Still, the jury found her not guilty of murder, citing a lack of solid evidence. In Sky Metawala's case, his mother, Julia Beryukova, said her car broke down on the side of the road, and she left her toddler alone while she went to get gas. When police arrived, the car worked fine, and Sky was never seen again. Her story didn't add up, but no charges were filed. Suspicion lingered, especially after it came to light she was in the middle of a custody battle. In each of these cases, the public reaction was fierce. Parents were scrutinized for every detail: how quickly they called police, how emotional they were, what they said, and what they didn't say. These judgments were often based not on hard evidence, but on how well someone conformed to our expectations of grief. But what if those expectations are flawed? Some people become hysterical. Others shut down entirely. Trauma and shock do not follow a rulebook. Yet time and again, emotional response becomes mistaken for evidence of guilt. It's a dangerous leap from "they aren't acting right" to "they must have done it." That's not to say parents can never be responsible. In some cases they are. But the question remains, how do we fairly distinguish between a grieving parent and a guilty one? The answer lies in facts, in patterns, in forensic evidence, not just in behavior that feels off. In the Sullivan case, we see echoes of these past tragedies. A missing child, no clear sign of abduction, a timeline that doesn't quite hold, and two adults whose responses divide public opinion. But as history has shown us, suspicion alone doesn't equal guilt. If we've learned anything from these past cases, it's this: the truth takes time. And while it's tempting to fill in the blanks ourselves, doing so too quickly could mean pointing fingers at the wrong people, while the real danger stays hidden. Despite the attempts for the search, still no answers. No charges. No remains. No justice. Only silence. It's just paused in a cruel and unfinished sentence. And so, we ask, what happens next? Will new evidence emerge? Will technology finally catch what the eye could not? Or will this case, like too many others, fade into cold case archives, where only the most stubborn hearts continue digging? We can't say for sure, But what we do know is these two children are gone. Not just names in a file or faces in a news report, but lives. Innocent, vibrant, unfinished lives. And whatever the truth is, they deserve it. They deserve to be found. They deserve to be known. So if you still believe in justice, hold them in your thoughts. Pray that someone will speak. Pray that someone will break the silence. Pray that wherever Lilly and Jack are, they are not alone. Because the story may not yet be over. And sometimes, the smallest light, a voice, a clue, a memory, is all it takes to bring them home.